Welcome to HOA Disasters, the channel where we expose the outrageous, the absurd, and the downright unbelievable stories from neighborhood hell. I'm Chico, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA that went too far, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell because trust me, these stories only get crazier. My father spent the last months of his life in the quietest corner of my backyard, under a towering sycamore tree that had been there since before I was born. Its limbs arched wide like the arms of something ancient, steady and patient. That patch of grass beneath it had once been where I set up lemonade stands, where our old Labrador used to nap in the sun. But in those final months, it became something else entirely. A sanctuary. Walter Reynolds, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired, had fought in a war that aged him early and haunted him forever. 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 body that never truly came home. The VA doctors called it lung disease. He called it karma. I called it unfair. Every morning, I'd help him out of bed, wrap him in his thick olive green quilt, and guide him outside to the tree. Some days we'd talk. Most days he'd just sit there in silence, staring westward into the woods. The light would catch his profile just right and soften the deep creases on his face, the same way it used to when I was a little girl watching him shave in the morning. One afternoon, as autumn crept in and the air grew crisp, he gripped my hand with a surprising firmness. We were sitting side by side in mismatched lawn chairs, the sun bleeding through the trees. "When I'm gone," he said, his breath slow and deliberate. "Promise me you'll place a bench right here, not anywhere else. Right here, facing west, toward the sun." I turned to him, tears already gathering. "Of course, Dad, I promise." He nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "Make it wood, oak, solid, not some plastic thing from Home Depot. And a plaque, just my name, my years, and Semper Fi, nothing more." Then, quieter, as if he were talking to God more than me, "It matters more than you know." He passed the following week. Hospice was gentle. I was not. I cried, broke a mug, and slept in his chair for 2 days. But I kept my promise. I found a local craftsman, a Gulf War vet who used woodworking as therapy. Together we designed a simple oak bench with strong lines, soft edges, and space beneath it to let the grass grow through. I bolted it into the soil myself, in the exact spot my father pointed to. The plaque was bronze, understated, clean, in memory of Sir Walter Reynolds, USMC, 1947 to 2023, Semper Fi. Within a week, it became more than just a memorial. People began showing up, quietly, respectfully. A neighbor left a tiny flag. Someone else brought a single sunflower. An elderly man I didn't know sat there for over an hour one morning, tears running down his face. A child left a painted rock that said, "Thank you, soldier." It became sacred space, not just for me, but for anyone carrying a weight they couldn't explain. I visited every morning with my coffee. I'd sit in silence, listen to the wind through the trees, and imagine my dad beside me, finally at peace. I thought it would always be safe, but someone else had been watching, and they were about to tear it all apart. The first time I saw Carol Whitmore up close, I was rinsing out my father's old Marine Corps mug. It still had the chipped handle and faded emblem. He never let me replace it. The knock on the door was sharp, controlled, the kind of knock you use when you don't expect to be ignored. I wasn't expecting company, but I opened the door anyway, and there she was. Carol stood on my porch in a lemon-yellow blazer and a delicate gold brooch shaped like a sailboat. Her hair was tight, her clipboard tighter. Her eyes didn't wander, not to the wreath on my door, not to the wind chimes above her head. They went straight through me, to the backyard behind the house. "Lovely tribute," she said, her smile already brittle. "It's clear how much he meant to you." I didn't smile back. He did. Her gaze slid past me, toward the side yard, where the top of the bench was just barely visible between fence posts. "Just a reminder," she continued, flipping a page on her clipboard she didn't need to look at. Anything permanent that's visible from a public easement needs board review. I frowned. It's on private property. She nodded like she agreed with me, but her voice didn't follow. Sometimes the lines blur, especially when a structure is visible from a community-maintained trail. I looked past her, down the street. Nothing unusual. Yet. She turned to go without leaving a flyer, a warning, or any official notice. Just that same vague smile and the unsettling feeling she'd already made a decision and was only pretending she hadn't. For a day, nothing happened. Then I noticed an unfamiliar truck parked 2 houses down. It didn't have a logo, just 2 orange cones placed neatly behind it. I saw a man sitting inside with his phone raised just a little too long. The next day it came back. And the day after that. By Thursday, I found Carol herself standing on the Greenbelt Trail behind my fence. She was angled just enough into the brush that I wouldn't have seen her if I hadn't walked out early to check the mail. She was holding her phone low and vertical, camera lens pointed right between the slats in my fence, toward the bench. Stepped into view. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She turned and walked the other way, her shoes silent on the dirt path. I should have called someone. I should have asked questions. But part of me still believed in decency. That a promise made to a dying father couldn't possibly offend anyone. 3 days later, the bench was gone. It was the kind of morning where nothing felt off, until everything did. I stepped outside with my watering can, planning to check the tomatoes before work. The sun was low, soft and quiet filtered through the trees. But as I turned the corner by the side gate, my feet stopped cold. The bench wasn't where it had always been. It wasn't upright. It wasn't whole. It was shattered. Splintered wood. Twisted screws. The seat cracked right down the middle. It had been dumped in a heap beside my recycling bins, like a broken chair after a garage sale. One of the legs jutted out at an awkward angle, snapped clean through. The plaque was still attached, but bent, scratched and caked with dirt. Rubber banded to one of the busted legs was a crumpled yellow slip of paper. I tore it off and tried to smooth it out, hands trembling. Unearth. Unauthorized structure. Section 5.2a. No warning, no signature, just that cold sentence. My first instinct was disbelief. Maybe it had fallen. Maybe kids had broken in. Maybe it was some sick mistake. But deep down, I already knew. Caro. I ran back inside and grabbed my phone, cycling through contacts, pulling up the HOA number. Voicemail. I called Carol directly. Straight to voicemail again. The HOA office? No answer. No call back, no email, no posted notice on my door, no letter in my mailbox. They didn't ask. They didn't tell. They came into my fenced yard like they owned it, and destroyed the last piece of my father I had. That afternoon, the silence broke. With an email. No subject line, no greeting, no signature. Due to your non-compliance with community aesthetic standards, the unauthorized fixture was removed at cost to you. Blurred. I stared at it until the screen blurred, the words swimming in static. No apology. No humanity. Just a cold confirmation that this was intentional. Fine. I opened the drawer near the fridge. Inside were his dog tags. The ones I hadn't touched in weeks. I kept telling myself I wasn't ready. Now I wasn't sure I'd ever be. I wrapped the chain around my fingers, metal-biting skin, and let myself slide down onto the kitchen floor. No tears at first, just that crushing weight in my chest. It felt like being buried in silence. My hand tightened around the tags. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I failed you." But deep beneath the grief, something else stirred. Anger. The kind that didn't blink. The kind that remembered. The kind that didn't stay quiet for long. Care of Whitmore didn't come out of nowhere. She wasn't new. She had been circling for years. Before she ever walked up my driveway with that clipboard, she had already carved out a reputation. not just here, but in every HOA she'd ever touched. Former vice president at Horizon Properties, a luxury subdivision developer known for tight control and manicured optics. Their slogan was "Community in Harmony." Their internal nickname for Carol was the Scalpel. She moved into our neighborhood 3 years ago into a corner lot house that hadn't been touched since the early 2000s. Within a month, the shutters were replaced, the porch furniture color coordinated with seasonal wreaths, and the lawn trimmed to golf course precision. She ran for the HOA board 6 months later and lost by 2 votes. But fate, or maybe opportunism, opened a door. A neighbor's messy divorce vacated a board seat. Carol pounced. A 4-3 vote later, she was president. From that moment on, the HOA wasn't a volunteer service, it was a regime. She started with newsletters, long, sterile emails about maintaining neighborhood excellence. Then came the new policies, limits on holiday lights, fines for flags too large, a garden decor audit. People grumbled, but most rolled their eyes and complied. She wasn't going after them yet. But Carol didn't want obedience. She wanted uniformity. People think freedom means freedom to be tacky, she once told the board during a recorded meeting. That's not what this community stands for. What she meant was nothing sentimental, nothing messy, nothing that made someone pause or feel. And lately her focus had narrowed. It called them visual violations. A child's chalk drawing of a rainbow on a driveway, washed off with a citation taped to the door. A porch flag in support of a deployed son, taken down during a routine inspection. Wind chimes that disrupted the tranquility of adjacent lots, banned entirely. And it wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about erasure. Anything that didn't fit the sterile image in her head was a threat. She operated through fear and paperwork. Letters that looked legal, fines that arrived before warnings. She wasn't loud, she was surgical. That's why she hated my bench. Because it wasn't just wood and bolts. It was meaning. It was memory. It was public grief. On private land, where she couldn't control the story. And Carol hated stories she didn't write. A week after the bench was removed, I learned she had emailed the HOA board late at night. The subject line read, "No exceptions." In the body, a single line. Especially not for emotional ploys. That's when I stopped grieving and started planning. By the time I stepped into James Everett's office, my anger had cooled just enough to become something sharper, focused, lethal. The walls of his small firm were lined with military memorabilia, folded flags, bronze plaques, a framed photo of him in desert camo, shaking hands with a general I recognized from history books. James Everett wasn't just my dad's old friend. He was his legal backbone, retired JAG officer, now specializing in elder and veteran law. If anyone would know what to do, it was him. He looked up from his desk as I walked in and immediately stood. "Maya," he said softly, eyes flicking over my face. "I heard. I am sorry." I nodded and sat down, my fingers already pulling the worn manila folder from my bag. "I brought his will," I said. "The VA filed one." He took it without a word, slid on his glasses and began reading. I watched his brow crease as he flipped past the basics, then pause. The clause was there, just like I remembered. My father had insisted it be included, even though I told him it wasn't necessary. To remain undisturbed in my daughter's private yard, facing west as a peaceful place of rest, a memorial bench crafted from wood, bearing my name and years of service. This shall serve as my final request. James reread it twice, then leaned back, whistling low. "This isn't optional," he said finally. "Under federal statute, Title 38, Section 2402, there are burial directive protections that apply to veterans. And under state code, private memorials on private land tied to military wills have recognized precedent." Wink. "Are you saying it's illegal?" He looked me dead in the eyes. I'm saying if they stepped onto your property without notice and destroyed something designated in a military will, they didn't just break HOA rules. They committed trespass, theft, and possibly willful destruction of protected memorial property. He stood, walked over to a locked cabinet, and pulled out a thick binder marked VA Directives and Case Law. Flipping to a tab labeled Civil Violations, he began reading aloud precedent. Cases where families had sued city agencies and HOAs for touching veteran memorials. They all ended the same way, with settlements, apologies, and reputations in ashes. "Can we sue?" I asked quietly. James smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Oh, Maya," he said, "we're not just going to get your bench back." He closed the binder with a solid thunk and looked at me like a commander about to give orders. "We're going to make them regret ever touching it." James's words didn't leave me. Not that day, not that night. I went home and sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd once held my father's dog tags, and crumbled into myself. But this time, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop. If we were going to war, I needed ammunition. I started with the HOA's digital archives. Newsletters, meeting minutes, financial statements, the public stuff. Clean, curated, but the cracks showed quickly. Discrepancies in spending, missing documents, vague approvals that didn't name names. Then I remembered the gazebo. Harold's pristine white monstrosity had gone up last summer. A neighbor joked once that it looked like a wedding rental. Twinkle lights, ceiling fan, floral trim. I checked every monthly agenda from the past 2 years. No mention, no vote, no approval. Strike one. Next came the finances. Darren Platt, ho-ho treasurer, had a freshly paved brick driveway laid 3 months ago. Everyone saw it. The problem? There was a $3,920.00 general maintenance charge in that same month's ledger, but no invoices, no receipts, and nothing scheduled on the community calendar. I checked with a board member's husband. Quiet guy, works in HVAC. He confirmed it. Darren told me the HOA covered part of it since he hosts events. Total crap. Strike two. And Miriam Hess? I found a folder from an old community group email chain. Turns out someone, possibly drunk, possibly careless, had archived emails from her during early COVID years. One thread titled Urgent Review revealed a disturbing pattern. Approval for Sheila's bird bath, deny Andy's flagpole, avoid setting precedent for expressive displays. Selective enforcement, friendly approvals, crackdowns on the wrong kind of sentiment. Strikes three. But it was the last thread that made my skin go cold. Buried in a screenshot, reposted by a homeowner watchdog blog, was a quote from Carol herself, an internal email from just 2 weeks before they destroyed the bench. "The bench needs to go before Veterans Day. Don't want to draw attention to it. We've allowed enough visual sentiment from the quieto homes. No exceptions. No mention of rules. No appeal to aesthetics. Just optics. Timing. Control. It wasn't about the bench. It was about what it stood for, and what it threatened to remind people of." By the time the sun rose, my living room looked like an evidence war room. Documents printed and stacked, violations circled in red, dates highlighted, screenshots backed up on a flash drive. James had given me the lock, but I had the proof, and I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to expose every single one of them. I thought I'd be fighting this alone. Thought maybe no one else cared, but the more I uncovered, the more I realized I wasn't the only one Carol had come for. After printing out my last document, I didn't sleep. I walked the neighborhood instead, slowly, with the clipboard tucked under my arm and a quiet fire in my chest. I wasn't knocking on doors to rant. I was listening. Luis Mendoza was the first. A Vietnam vet with a limp and more medals than anyone would guess from his plain flannel shirts. He remembered my dad. They used to sit 2 pews apart at the same church. "They ripped out my flagpole in 2020, he said, gesturing with his cane to an empty spot on his porch. Said it was making noise in the wind. I live alone. That flag was my company. No warning, just Gone. I nodded. Did you ever appeal it? He laughed without humor. To who? Carol. Next was Shannon Clark, a single mom juggling 3 jobs and 2 kids. She had a watercolor taped to her porch window. Her daughter had painted a rainbow and written, "I love this house." I got fined $500 for non-standard exterior signage, she told me, holding up the violation letter. They said it could attract unwanted attention. My kid's 6. Story after story stacked up. Quiet ones, silenced ones. People who'd never fought back because they thought they were the only ones. I decided I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. I pulled out my phone, opened the neighborhood app, and posted a photo of the bench. Shattered, dirty, plaque still clinging to one slat. I added a caption beneath it. This was my father's memorial bench. USMC, Vietnam veteran, removed by the HOA without notice. This is what they think of service and sacrifice. Then I attached the violation slip, the quote from Carol's email, the part about emotional ploys. And I hit post. Within 24 hours, it had 25 comments. By the next morning, 60. Most were supportive. Outrage, shock, offers to help. Veterans messaging to ask if I needed legal aid. But then the others came. Anonymous accounts calling me manipulative, accusing me of weaponizing grief for attention. One person wrote, "Rules are rules. This isn't Arlington." And then it escalated. I found it in my mailbox late Friday night. A typed note on plain white paper. Stop dividing the community. No name, no return address, just fear dressed up as authority. But it didn't scare me. It confirmed I was hitting the right nerve. They wanted silence. I gave them headlines. The note in my mailbox should have shaken me, but it did the opposite. It clarified everything. They were afraid of attention. So I gave them more. After the neighborhood app lit up, I reached out to a local journalist, Marisa Kwan, a reporter known for digging into city corruption and bureaucratic overreach. I'd seen her work before, but this time I wasn't reading her story. I was giving her one. We met at a cafe off Main. I brought a folder with everything. Photos, violation slips, Carol's email about Veterans Day, and my father's military will. She didn't say much as she read, just took notes and asked for exact dates. 2 days later, the headline dropped. Veteran's last wish destroyed by HOA. Daughter fights back. It opened with a photo of my father in uniform, then a picture of the broken bench, twisted wood and all. The story was clean, sharp, and damning. Marissa included quotes from me, but it was the documentation that did the real damage. Carol's words in black and white, the will clause, the flagpole removals, the selective enforcement. And people noticed. The article spread fast. First through local Facebook groups, then veteran forums and Reddit threads. I woke up the next morning to dozens of messages. Strangers were sharing stories about their own HOA nightmares. Some offered legal tips, others just said thank you. Think it went national. A retired Army colonel posted it on X with the caption, "This is what happens when power goes unchecked in small towns. Shameful." That's when everything changed. A local city councilman, Troy Chambers, a former Army Ranger, reached out. "Whatever you need," he said over the phone. "You've got support. No veteran's memory should be treated like garbage." 2 days later, a news van showed up, then another. They parked across the street from the HOA office, filming as confused board members tried to wave them off with clipboards and muttered excuses. Carol didn't come outside. Instead, she issued a press release, cold, corporate, and crawling with passive voice. "We regret any perceived disrespect caused by the removal of the unauthorized fixture. The board remains committed to maintaining a uniform and harmonious community aesthetic." No apology, no ownership, just the phrase, perceived disrespect, as if the real problem was how we'd reacted, not what they'd done. But the outrage didn't slow down. That same evening, I got an email from a national civil liberties group that specialized in veteran protections and free expression cases. They'd seen the story, they were watching the footage, and they were offering to represent me. Pro bono, full force. Karen wanted to keep this quiet. She just triggered the loudest fight of her career. The lawsuit wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And the moment we filed it, everything shifted. James and I submitted the civil suit first thing Monday morning. It was long, methodical, and impossible to ignore. We charged them with trespass and property destruction for entering my private, fenced backyard and dismantling a memorial tied directly to a legally binding military will. We cited state-level veteran protection statutes that explicitly guard against the removal or defacement of service memorials, especially those placed on private land. We accused the HOA of abusing its own governance structure, pointing to selective enforcement, concealed financial records, and internal communications proving Carol's personal vendetta. And finally, we demanded damages for emotional distress. Because what they had done wasn't just illegal, it was cruel. The case landed in the local news within hours. But what made the real difference was the insurance response. HOA board members had assumed their insurance would shield them from the fallout. But once the provider reviewed the filings and saw the emails, the public backlash, the internal patterns of misconduct, they pulled out. The letter said it plainly. This wasn't standard civil exposure. This was deliberate, personal action by the board president and therefore not eligible for coverage. The moment that news broke, the board began to fracture. Some members claimed they had no idea what Carol had been doing. Others tried to quietly resign or distance themselves. Whispers of "vote her out" echoed through group chats and whispered phone calls. But Carol stood her ground. She doubled down. In an emergency board meeting that someone anonymously recorded and leaked, she shouted into the camera, "I have done nothing wrong. I am protecting the order of this community." And then she crossed another line. She issued a formal HOA violation against me, retroactively applying a fine of $1,000 per day for what she called public defamation of HOA leadership. The letter accused me of running a coordinated media campaign to discredit the board and inflame division. No hearing, no notice, just another attempt to silence me through intimidation and death. James read the fine print, smirked, and slid the letter across the table like it was a cocktail napkin. She just made your case stronger. But I wasn't surprised. Carol's playbook hadn't changed. She thought if she pushed hard enough, I'd fold. But she didn't understand. What she never understood was that this wasn't just about me. It was about my father, and everyone like him who'd been quietly erased in the name of aesthetics. James said it best that night as we finalized our response and prepared for the next wave of hearings. He looked down at the document with her name printed at the top and said, "She's not just losing a case. She's about to lose her legacy." The courtroom was full before I even walked in. Rows of chairs lined with veterans, some in dress blues, some in faded service jackets, others in civilian clothes wearing pins that said everything they needed to. There were Vietnam vets with canes, young Marines with rigid posture, even a few Army Rangers in black berets sitting with arms folded across their chests. Every branch was represented. My father would have been stunned. Cameras were tucked into corners. Local journalists with notepads and microphones whispered across the aisles. Even the judge took a moment before sitting, scanning the packed room with a raised brow that said, "This is more than just a zoning issue." When my name was called, I stepped up slowly. My hands didn't shake, not because I wasn't nervous, but because I wasn't just speaking for myself. I started with the photos. One by one, I laid them before the court. The bench, as it stood. The plaque before it was scratched. The shredded remains dumped by my trash bins. Then I read from the will. My father's will. His final request, notarized and recognized by the VA. I spoke clearly, letting each word sit in the air. To remain undisturbed in my daughter's private yard, facing west, as a peaceful place of rest. Then I held up the plaque. The same one they tossed aside like scrap metal. The room was silent as I held it with both hands, like it still meant something. Because it did. James followed with his portion of the argument, citing case law, veterans' rights protections, and the reckless overreach of a governing body that believed itself above both law and conscience. Then came the HOA. Carol took the stand, polished and poised, but the mask cracked the moment the judge started asking questions. "Did you enter the plaintiff's property without notice or consent?" She hesitated. "We believed, based on the easement." "That's not what I asked." Her voice faltered. "Were you aware of the existence of a legally filed veteran burial directive?" I'd not. Had not reviewed the specific details. The judge's face hardened. When the decision came, it was swift, thorough, and final. The court awarded me $125,000 in damages. The bench was to be permanently reinstated in the exact location from which it was taken. And the HOA was ordered to publish a formal apology, public, signed, and posted to their official website for 1 full year. Carol didn't speak as she left the courtroom. I did. I turned, slowly, until I was looking her straight in the eye. Not with anger, not with triumph. It's truth. You never got to know my father, I said quietly. But now, everyone else will. Carol didn't show her face again after the ruling. Not at the HOA meeting, not in the neighborhood, not even at her own resignation announcement, which was emailed out 3 days later by the board's interim secretary. It was brief, 2 sentences. No explanation, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just a clinical effective immediately, and a list of responsibilities she'd handed off. But her name was radioactive now. Darren Platt, the treasurer who'd funneled HOA funds into his own driveway, stepped down quietly a week later. No fanfare, no apology, just a notice posted at the community bulletin board before dawn. Miriam Hess followed 2 days after that, citing personal stress and community division as reasons for leaving. The board was imploding under its own weight. Emergency elections were held in the church gymnasium 2 blocks from my house. The turnout was massive. More residents than anyone could remember showing up for anything HOA. People who had never voted before came with notes, questions, and firm opinions. They elected a new board. Diverse, local, grounded. No real estate ties, no hidden agendas. Their first act was to pass a new bylaw, one they called Walter's Clause. From that day forward, no memorial tied to a veteran could be altered, removed, or questioned by the HOA without a court order. Not for aesthetics, not for harmony, not for anything. It was unanimous. The bench was rebuilt by volunteers. Neighbors came out with gloves, power tools, and Tier Street determination. Some brought flowers. Others brought folding chairs and stories of fathers, uncles, and sisters who served. A man I barely knew, an Air Force vet with Parkinson's, helped set the bolts. "I didn't know Walter," he said, gripping my hand, "but I'm proud to sit where he did." When it was done, I stood there for a long time. Just me, the wood, and the wind. I sat down slowly, placed my hand on the new plaque, and cried harder than I had since the morning it disappeared. Not because I was broken, but because the world had finally stopped trying to erase him. The next morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name written in crisp, careful cursive. Inside was a letter. It wasn't long. There was no justification, no list of excuses. Only this. I didn't understand what it meant. I see that now. I'm sorry for what I took from you. Carol? No one else ever saw her again. But somehow, that letter said everything she couldn't say in court. The seasons shifted without asking for permission, as they always do. Summer folded gently into fall, and the leaves above the bench began to turn gold, just like they had when my father first asked me to place it there. Only now, the bench stood stronger than before. Clean, reinforced, and untouchable. I sat there one evening as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass. Kids were laughing in a nearby yard, their voices dancing on the breeze. A dog barked once, chasing after a soccer ball. Life was happening around me again, not in defiance of grief, but alongside it. My hand moved to the plaque, warm from the day's sun. The engraving had been repolished, every letter crisp and shining, in memory of certain Walter Reynolds, USMC 194720023. Semper Fi. Beside it, someone had tucked a small American flag into the soil. I didn't know who. They never signed their names. Revenge had become more than mine. Veterans now visited from other towns. Some left flowers. Others left coins, medals, small tokens of respect. One man, missing a hand, sat quietly for nearly an hour without saying a word, then stood, saluted, and left without ever looking back. People brought their grief here, and somehow it made the air feel lighter. Not sad, but sacred. The story had traveled farther than I ever expected. A state representative, one of the first to call me after the trial, had introduced a bill called Walter's Law. It passed with overwhelming support. From that point on, no HOA in our state could remove a veteran's memorial from private property without a court order. My father had fought wars in silence. Now his memory had won a battle that mattered. I looked out past the yard, past the rooftops, toward the sun dipping west, the direction he always wanted to face. The light filtered through the sycamore leaves, soft and golden, the way it had been that afternoon when he first told me his wish. He had asked for a bench. They tried to destroy it, but in doing so they gave it more meaning than anyone could have imagined. I sat back, let the silence settle, and thought about everything it had taken to reach this point. Every fight, every tear, every step forward. And I smiled, just a little. They thought they destroyed a piece of wood. But they built a monument instead. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos. See you in the next one.